On behalf of Kathy and RJ and their loving families, I welcome you all here today for the memorial service for Kristine Ciesinski. We're all here to celebrate and honor Chris's life and to express our gratitude together for all that she has given to us. She's touched all of our hearts, and there are many. This room is full of loving hearts. And there are other loving hearts listening to this now in Idaho, Ohio, California, London, Korea, and beyond. Welcome, everybody. I do want to say a few words about the service because it's maybe not, it's maybe a little bit different. Just to give you an idea of how the service is shaped. We'll sing a few hymns together. We're going to sing a response together. You'll see those in the program. There are musical offerings and poetry, because we know just how powerful poetry and music can be. And as you've noticed already, there are translations in the program for you to refer to. And of course, there's going to be a chance for us all to share our reflections together. And we've set 3 places in the program for that to happen. One is called Her Mountains. One section is called Her Music. You'll see that in the program. And then finally, her place in our hearts. So here's the tricky thing. We all love Chris, and we have many, many stories to tell. So this service will be one place where we can share together, but as you know, will be a light reception afterwards, and then another place at the picnic where we can also share anecdotes and stories. So I'm going to ask you, I know it's going to be hard, but I'm going to ask if you could keep your sharing to maybe 1 or 2 minutes, so that more people can have an opportunity to share. You will come up here when you want to share, okay? So that's where you'll come to speak. So we'll go on, move forward with the service, with the lighting of the chalice, and I'd like to ask Ray and Phoebe and Alexa and Nicole to come forward. John's going to read a prayer first.
In our time of grief, we light a flame of sharing, the flame of ongoing life. In this time when we search for understanding and serenity, in the face of loss, we light this sign of our quest for truth, meaning, and community. If you're able, please stand and sing together hymn 330, The Arching Sky of Morning Glows.
Siegfried Sasson was a British soldier in World War I and fought alongside my grandfather in France and Germany in 1917 and 1918. And for the remainder of his quite long life, he was a spirited anti-war teacher, lecturer, writer, and poet. And I take my phone out now because I half expect Chris to call and interrupt me. But in Sassoon's idyll, which you'll hear, these words perfectly encapsulate the hope and the direction and the love and the light embodied by the memory of my sister-in-law. In the gray summer garden I shall find you. With daybreak and the morning hills behind you, there will be rain-wet roses, stir of wings, and down the wood a thrush that wakes and sings. Not from the past you'll come, but from that deep where beauty murmurs to the soul asleep. And I shall know the sense of life reborn from dreams into the mystery of morn, where gloom and brightness meet. And standing there till that calm song is done, at last we'll share the league-spread choiring symphonies that are joy in the world and peace and dawn's one star.
To my dear Chris, praise the Lord, O my soul. O Lord my God, you are very great. You are clothed in splendor and majesty. He wraps himself in the light, stretches the heavens out, and he lays the beams of his chambers on the waters. He makes the clouds his chariots, and he rides on the wings of the wind. He makes the wind his messengers, and shines his flames of fire his servants. He set the earth in its place. It can never be moved. And he covered it with the deep as with a garment. I will sing unto the Lord as long as I live. I will sing praise to my God while I have my being. My meditation of him shall be sweet. I will be glad in the Lord. And I know that as he rides on the wind, the spirit of Chris Ciesinski will be with him. I love you, Chris. To my
Oh, thank you, Norman. So this is a moment to share. So if anyone would like to come forward, I'm going to sit down and listen. But this is a good time.
That was Norman Bailey, Kristine's husband, whom you just heard sing. And he asked the family to please read a letter that he sent us today. Dear family and friends, I'm sad not to be there to celebrate Chris's life with you. Chris poured out so much of herself to others that her treasure trove of love has gushed back in response to her passing. 2 memorial gatherings have already been held in Chris's name. One at a local church where Chris had organized a concert the day that she died, and the other was at the airport where the pilots and crew narrated Chris anecdotes. At least 2 concerts have been dedicated to her memory, and more are planned. During the first days following Chris's tragic death, I would instinctively think, I must ask Chris about that when I had a problem, but had to immediately retreat back into the knowledge that she had moved on to other planes of existence. Now, if our dogs Rocky and Chi-Chi do something amusing on their walk, I simply call out to them. I'll tell Chris about that when we get home. Chris loved to hear those stories about their shenanigans. Chris and I first met in Cincinnati 35 years ago when she was singing her first Wagnerian role, Eva, in Master Singers. And I was singing what was my 100-plus Hans Sachs. This time it was the baritone who took the soprano back home and not the tenor. This July, we were about to celebrate our 33rd wedding anniversary, and yet it only seems like yesterday that we first met. Sadly, we won't be receiving that telegram from the Queen congratulating us on our diamond anniversary. In the spirit of the occasion, I would like to share a short prayer with you. Know that the soul of a man or a woman is exalted above and is independent of all infirmities of body or mind. When it leaves the body, however, it will evince such ascendancy and reveal such influence as no force on earth can equal. Doesn't that just sound like Chris? All my love, Norman. And Norman, I know you're watching right now, and we love you too.
What a special ceremony and occasion. I want to thank all you expert singers and the conductress who put on quite a demonstration for the absolutely magnificent, heartfelt performance. I want to tell you a little quick story. Chris and Norm were gracious enough to invite 10 of us of the Hanson, Ciesinski clan, and this guy right here, out to the Tetons for a week, no less, at their magnificent residence. And Chris said, how would you like to go up for a glider flight? I said, Chris, I would love it. Ever since I was about that high, I always dreamed about going up in a glider and how it might be. And here we are at 10,500 feet high. The Tetons, no, we were 11,500 feet high. And the Tetons are 12,500. And she said, Howie, how would you like to take the controls? I said, oh my God. Okay. So I had the stick, and it was just so absolutely inspiring. You could hear the whistling of the wind coming by the windows. It was just absolutely magnificent. So I just want to say, this is special. And you guys have, all those who are here, have made it so.
My name is Atina Coates. I'm from Idaho. I was one of the very blessed to know Chris while she was there. You know, everything that Chris touched didn't turn to gold, but every person that she touched did. I know, speaking for all of us, we are so grateful that she loved those mountains and that they drew her to us. We all have an origin story, a story of how we met Chris and when we started being changed by her. It was life-altering. And even if I was the only one who had been changed by Chris, it was miraculous. And every day I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful for that association because it changed my life in drastic ways that I never could have anticipated. And so I just want to say, I know she affected the world with her singing, but she also very much affected the world with her teaching. Her teaching, there's hundreds of students all across the world that are so influenced and affected by that. And I'm just so very grateful to have been a part of her life and to have been so blessed by her.
This is a room filled with beautiful hearts who are all open and all have been touched and changed by the beauty of my sister's life. I speak now, I'll probably speak a couple of more times because I have thoughts about all of these aspects that we wanted to share. This is from someone who Chris befriended in the Tetons when she first arrived. And it was this strange, magnificent endeavor that Susan Eidrich and her husband Jean began with rescuing animals. And they housed them and fed them and cared for them, rehabilitated them. Many of them were injured and unable to survive on their own in the wild. And originally it was called the Wild Bunch Ranch. And so that's how we first got to know them. And it's one of the aspects of being in the Tetons, and especially in Teton Valley, Idaho, that was most meaningful to Chris. Susan is a incredible writer, and I wanted to read something that she posted at Chris's passing so that you could share a little bit in how Chris's attachment to the mountains meant so much to everyone who actually lived there and the community in Driggs and Victor, Idaho. Her email address was Sing and Soar, echoing her two great passions, opera singing and flying. She was a woman who lived her life with great intensity, a world-class opera singer who opened in most of the world's major opera houses. Her gorgeous and powerful voice poured forth from the depth of her, exquisitely modulated by her disciplined craft. An experienced, top-notch pilot, she took people on glider flights, like my Uncle Howie, to see the glory of the Grand Tetons. A beloved teacher, she helped her students find their voice, believing in them when they didn't yet believe in themselves. There's no greater gift than to give someone help in finding their voice, and thus themselves. When I, Susan, began more public speaking, it was Chris I went to for help, which she gave freely and unstintingly, lessons of warmth and toughness. She didn't tolerate sloppiness. An animal lover, she was involved with Earthfire, which is the successive name of the Wild Bunch Ranch, Earthfire Institute, from the beginning. We wouldn't be where we are without her, or perhaps even in existence. In the early years, we put on 3 galas featuring her star power. She arranged for a Steinway piano to be brought up 5 hours from Salt Lake City for the quality she demanded for a performance. And the company gladly donated it all. She recruited talented accompanists as she sang with photos of our animals on a screen behind her, choreographed to the music. One example you see is over there, the beautiful picture of her in the red, with her wings spread, and a wolf at her feet. The wolves at Earthfire are able to be visited up close and personal by the visitors to the Institute. She recruited talented accompanists. She swept onto the floor in full opera regalia, commanding attention through her sheer presence even before the liquid notes filled the room. People were sobbing from the pure beauty of it all. We received donations and long-term donors from those galas that helped sustain us since then. As we grow and share the beauty of the animals with people around the world, her voice and spirit is behind it, singing and helping us soar. She died in a plane crash, soaring above the Tetons. The entire valley was in shock. How can so vibrant a presence be gone so suddenly? The entire valley is in mourning. Her warm, generous spirit touched people everywhere through the many organizations she helped. I'm going to take a little digression here because I found a list when I was visiting just now of not one, not two, but almost 3 pages of animal organizations that my sister donated to and loved. So anyone wants a specific one, I have the list. I have the list. Okay, back to Susan. Chris hosted intimate, magical musical evenings in her home with her husband, Norman Bailey, who we have just heard. Equally talented sister and musical friends, creating lifelong memories. Her one failure was as a bear trainer. Hopelessly in love with animals, she thought she would try her hand at interacting with ours. They actually have some grizzly bears who live there at Earthfire. She came to try, but around animals, all her self-discipline failed. She loved them so much that they took advantage of her, and she couldn't stop herself from letting them get away with things. With characteristic, clear self-assessment, she said, "I suck at this." Chris, you are missed so much by so many. Your gorgeous voice and spirit no longer lighting up the world, but trite as it is, that phrase, "she died doing what she loved," is true. And until then, she lived with enough passion for several lives, along the way inspiriting and inspiring others and bringing joy, beauty, kindness, and clarity wherever she went. Safe travels, our friend. We will feel you soaring over this beloved valley of yours and hear your song on the wind.
As Chris would say, get up here.
Hi, I'm John Murray. This is my beautiful wife, Jane Cairns Murray. I am honored to have been included in an extended family of the Ciesinskis through the years, through the neighbors, the Cairnses. I want to tell you a quick story about Chris and Kathy. Years ago, we love Idaho too, but we usually go to the Sawtooths. We all, Chris, Kathy, and Sally Cairns and Ed Cairns and Jane and myself went and took a trip down Frank Church's River of No Return. It's called the Middle Fork of the Salmon. It's a 7-day trip, and you are in the middle of nowhere. It is absolutely gorgeous. Well, at some point, we ended up about the 3rd or 4th day in, and we ended up at this beach, and there was a cave across the river. So we all got across the river and hiked up to the cave, and then next thing I know, Chris and Kathy were singing in the cave. I want to tell you, it was one of the most incredible things I have ever been privy to in my life. And I'm a rock and roller, so opera is pretty good, you know. But what was more incredible is when we walked out of the cave, there were 5 or 6 river boats that had pulled over to listen to what was going on there. Norman, that's a testament to Greece. So it was a wonderful trip we had. And so I'm sorry we don't go to the Tetons too often. We're in the Sawtooths, which are pretty darn good too. So
I was lucky to grow up on Spring Valley Road and have a bunch of extra dads and moms and siblings because there were 3 families that did a lot together. Fortunately, Kathy and Chris didn't think I was a pesky younger sister. They let me sit under the piano and listen to them. And so I grew up listening to opera and thinking that was normal. So And then there's RJ, who's my big brother from another mother, who did think I was pesky and wouldn't let me into his treehouse. Dad's gonna build me one in the woods one of these days. Anyway, it was an honor to be part of our neighborhood and part of your lives. If you would. This is a poem from one of my favorite poets, and now I can't see to read it. But it's from Wendell Berry.
When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound, in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds.
I come into the peace of wild things who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world, and I am free.
I didn't know this was happening, so I did not prepare anything. I am Tom McNichols. I was 18 years old when I first met Chris through Joellen, and she and Norman had me out there for 6 subsequent summers to live with them. I studied with them, did everything with them. I met nieces, nephews, the entire family, and there's 1,000 stories I could tell. I will not tell the one about flying inverted, when she forgot to stall and leaned out of it. There were a lot of hours up there flying in those mountains with her. And as she said at the end of one of her videos, risk can be, what was the word she used in that, Peter? Risk can be, she did a video about her gliding that I had never seen. I found it on YouTube. Had not many views, and at the very end of it, Chris's quote was that risk can be calculated, but some things are just worth doing. And I continue to try to live by that. She taught me a whole lot from the time I was 18 to 25. And I thanked her along the way whenever I had some professional successes and whatnot. And one of those was not long before the crash. So again, thank you, Norman. Thank you, Chris. I'll see you soon.
Still and slow, deep inside all,
We have another moment of another segment for reflections, her music.
My name is Ed Cairns, and I watched Chris grow up across the street from me. And after that, we did a lot of things together, and one of them was whitewater rafting. And Chris and Norman and I had an experience that I still can only say is once in a lifetime thing. We spent 2 weeks going down the whole length of the Grand Canyon. We watched the Grand Canyon when it was that deep to when it was fully extended. And that was an experience. And during the trip, we made a little hike up the Little Colorado River, and Norman fell in it. And he couldn't get out. And I grabbed him and pulled him out, and now every time I see Norman, he congratulates me for saving his life. Thank you.
Hi. I knew Chris for 50 years. I met her 50 years ago. Music brought us together, and I think Kathy had something to do with that because at the time she was dating my brother. So, but whoever it was that brought us together, Chris, like everyone in this room and everyone who's listening, had an amazing, deep impact on me. We spent a lot of time together over the course of probably 10 or 12 years after we met, maybe more. And those were really formative years where Chris she was an adventurer, you know, until her last day. And she would explore things that were just mind-blowing to me and would sort of drag me along in her wake, sometimes very willingly, and sometimes skeptically. So I just want to share one of the things that probably brought us together was pasta. Chris loved pasta, as anyone who knows her knows. And just a quick story, she had this uncanny ability to sense when there was cooked pasta within a 50-mile radius. I come from an Italian family, and she was often at our house for these big festas. And one time this is the God's honest truth, we were walking up to the front of my house, and outside the front door, she said, "Oh, wow, there's pasta in there." And I said, "Well, it's an Italian household. You know, there probably is pasta in there." And so we went in and went to the kitchen, and I just thought, well, you know, there's no pasta out, so I guess it's in the fridge. So I went in the fridge, could not find it. She says, no, there's pasta in the fridge. And I said, okay, you know, go look. And she dug into the refrigerator and found this bowl of pasta that somehow was some leftover thing that, I don't know how old it was, it didn't matter. And Chris, you know, consumed it with the relish that she used in everything she did in her life. That's a story that really connects me to Chris. There are so many others, but that one I think is good for today. Thank you.
I'm Oriole O'Neill. I was in the magical group with Chris at Newark High School. And as seniors, she was already directing us in a rehearsal. And one day she said, as probably any music teacher would tell you, you don't slide up to the note, you land on top of the note when you're going for a high note. And all through my life, I have heard her voice as I go for the high note. And she has been with me my whole life. Thank you.
So most of you know me as Ray, some of you know me as RJ. I have had the unique ability to growing up with her before most of you got to know her. So there is just a giant stack of files of stories and things that I could just tell. And it just goes on and on and on. And hearing all you singing and hearing all you talking just brings back floods and more floods of memories. And almost don't know where to start. But you know, everybody knows Chris about her singing and her flying. But when she was growing up, and I was this little weedy kid running around trying to figure out what was going on, it was a piano and an organ and a lot of voice and music. And I'm like, oh man, I don't know, this is not me. And I went out and did my own thing. And believe it or not, she was the one that actually got me into fishing. And she was the one that got me into other adventures. There was a great memory was I used to go hiking in the woods, and Kathy remembers. There used to be this little creek in the woods, and there was this Tarzan rope. and she was the one that climbed way out there, put that Tarzan rope out there, swung us out and in the creek. You know, it took a lot of courage to do that, and she was the one that actually climbed out there, put it on that tree that extended out. You know, that was just amazing. But you know, I'm not sure if everybody understands the depth of her love for music, and I just thought I'd share a couple stories. But you know, it wasn't just singing that she liked. She sprawled out and was checking out all sorts of things. She was in the marching band. She was playing the glockenspiel, banging away in the glockenspiel. And these instruments were coming and going out of our modest-sized house in the living room that already had the Steinway piano and the organ, and the living room was just packed with stuff. And then she got on this kick, and she needed to play drums. There was a snare drum. She'd be playing the drums, and Kathy was out there just straight and narrow doing the singing deal, and she's out there putzing around with all these other instruments. And then next thing you know, this big box shows up, and I'm like, what is that? She opens it up. It's a French horn. So next thing you know, she's in there, you know, tooting away on the French horn for years. And I'm not sure if she did it with the marching band or whatever, but she was just like into all these instruments. Then another big box showed up. What was in that? She opens it up. It's a cello. So next thing you know, and you know, she was ushering in the cello, playing the cello. I'm like, what is going on? Just, you know, and she was singing as well. You know, and she was also into at high school. I just shared this memory with Kathy a little while ago. She was in this little folk singing group called the Four Folk, and she was playing in high school. And there would be four people singing like Irish tunes and whatnot. And they'd be coming over and going to the house and rehearsing, and then we'd be going down to the auditorium at school to listen to this. And it was one thing after another. But I think the fondest memory I have, I just share, and there are just a zillion I could go to. Another box showed up at the house. I'm like, what is this? She opens it up, and it's an accordion. I don't know if you all know what an accordion is, right? It's a squeeze box that, you know, it goes like this, and she's playing, and she's singing, and the greatest memory I've got is there was a Beatles song, and it was "We Can Work It Out." And she would just take this thing and she'd go, we can work it out, we can work it out, life is very short and there's no time. So I was, and that ushered the era of me loving the Beatles, because that just tied into, you know, Kath and me and her riding in the back seat of long rides up to New York City to visit Grandma and Grandpa, you know, harmonizing with Beatles in the back. You take the low, you take the middle, and Chris gets the high. Anyway, there's just so much more to share with you all, and I'm loving hearing all these other stories, but I just had to get that one out
there. The lady who spoke before Ray mentioned landing on top of the note, and so that has spurred me to extend a comment in that direction. My name is Mary Ann Ballard, and I was a graduate student at the University of Pennsylvania in the early 1970s and wanted to put together a madrigal group. And so there were people around who were good singers. One of whom was Sean Deibler. If you're from Philadelphia and have been in music, you know Sean was a conductor in Philadelphia, but he was also a marvelous baritone. And he knew Chris somehow. Anyway, he brought Chris, and we formed this madrigal group called the Suffolk Owls. It was named after a madrigal, Sweet Suffolk Owl, by a Renaissance composer. And I have here a photo of the group, which I'll put on the table over there. We have Sean on the right and then Chris in the forefront. It's one of the most beautiful photos I have from this time. The thing about Chris that made her magic, besides her irreverence, her spirit, her sense of humor, but musically, was the way she savored every sound she made. She was totally committed. She made you believe the words that she was singing. And she didn't let a vowel or a consonant go by without somehow drawing its individual character out, which made this early madrigal singing very expressive. I mean, when you sing madrigals, you're part of a team, you know, people, it's a little community. Anyway, ever since then, that has been my standard for appreciating singers. And I am not at all surprised that she and Kathy have had the success they've had, because they both have this quality.
We'll close this portion of the program and move forward. There is going to be one more place for sharing at the top of the third column there, but we'll close here.
Little If you'd like to follow along, reading the poem, it's on the back of your program. In Blackwater Woods by Mary Oliver. Look, the trees are turning their own bodies into pillars of light, are giving off the rich fragrance of cinnamon and fulfillment. The long tapers of cattails are bursting and floating away over the blue shoulders of the ponds. And every pond, no matter what its name is nameless now.
Every year, everything I have ever learned in my lifetime leads back to this: the fires and the black river of loss whose other side is salvation, whose meaning none of us will ever know. To live in this world, you must be able to do three things: to love what is mortal, to hold it against your bones, knowing your own life depends on it, and, when the time comes to let it go, to let it go.
Our last time for reflection together is called Her Place in Our Hearts. And this one's structured slightly differently because we're going to open with the Sanctus from the Fauré's Requiem, which was, the full performance was performed this summer in Mexico in memory of Chris. And Kathy asked that the Sanctus be included here to open into this section. And then immediately following this beautiful rendition, we have one person on the recording that's going to share her reflection with us. So we'll hear the Sanctus, and then we'll hear Martha Tony, and then a longtime friend of Chris's, and then it'll open up for other reflections. And we will, at the end of this section, we will close with the Brahms duet.
Greetings, this is Martha Tony. It is a pleasure today to be with you, celebrating the life of an extraordinary human being, Kristine Ciesinski. Our friendship goes back well over 40 years. As a matter of fact, I can point back to 1976, an eventful year, not only for the birth of America as we celebrated the bicentennial of our country's birth, but also in some ways the birth of a lifelong friendship with Chris and Kat, and the joy that we led together over the many years along with my friend Rita Golden. We were there in 1976 for a celebration in Leadville, Colorado, of a production of Baby Doe. And somehow Chris and I were in a chorus kicking up our heels. I was Silver Dollar. I can't really remember the part that Chris did, but the whole point of our being on the stage was to see how high we could kick our heels over our heads. Now, Chris was a lanky person and had long legs, and for her it was no big deal. She could kick so high. And we used to laugh ourselves absolutely silly over my standing beside her and barely getting my feet to go more than 6 inches off the floor. And we reenacted this scene for our friends over the years many, many times because it was just hysterically funny. And one of the most beautiful parts of Chris was her sense of humor. Her ability to just really not only laugh at herself, but just to laugh, just to have a good time. And so one of the things that summer we did was celebrate the day that I angrily thrust my foot through the dressing room wall and left a big hole in the wall. And so Chris and I together decided we would paint a frame around it and just leave it there, which we call the hole in the dressing room wall. These were things that we did that just brought us closer and closer together and enhanced our friendship through the years and left us with memories that we carry still today. In some ways, those high kicks of Chris Ciesinski was representative of who she was. She was a high-wire act, full of life, and I mean real life, abundant life. She would have never done anything ordinary. She wouldn't have lived ordinary, and she would not have died ordinary. She would have always chosen to have soared into the blue sky, and she would have taken any challenge on that life gave her. Without fear, she would have faced it. And there would have been no other option for my friend Chris. John Henry Newman said, and I quote, "Growth is the only evidence of life." The ancient writer Seneca expressed it another way, and I quote him, "Often a very old man has no other proof of his long life than his age." End of quote. I think many of us think that a good life is a long life. It's not a good way to think. Quality of life is not measured by years. Life is measured by quality, by contribution, by love. We mostly all live very fragile lives, as the poet Keats says, like a dewdrop on its perilous way from a tree's summit. But not our Chris. Chris didn't live with fragility in mind, but she lived with full awareness that to live life was to risk. To live life was to grow. And to live life was not to measure life by time, but to measure life by eternal joy. The kind of life that Jesus offered us in John's gospel when he said, I am come that they may have life and that they may have it more abundantly. And that same John who wrote that gospel, later in his revelation, wrote these words, see, the home of God is among mortals. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them. He will wipe every tear from their eye, and death will be no more. Mourning and crying and pain will be no more, for the first things have passed away. Chris, you've shown us how to live abundant life. You've taught us to kick high, to soar high. You've shown us that life is not measured by years, but rather the intense joy of now. My sweet friend, kick on, kick high. Remind us always that growth is the true evidence of life. We love you. Amen.
My name is Lance Rondeau. I'm one of Chris's former students. I studied with her from roughly 2004 to 2006. And prior to having the privilege of studying with her, I was aware of her. Most people in the music department were aware of Chris. She was this mythic person, the ability to take a normal singer and turn them into a powerhouse singer. My very first lesson with Chris, my range increased by a perfect fourth because she taught me how to breathe correctly. She could see in you what you couldn't see. And she had this keen ability to extract it and teach you what you could do. And when we couldn't have confidence in our own abilities, we could lean on her confidence in us as we slowly grew to understand the abilities that we had within us. There were many criticisms that she would offer us in her lessons. My wife, Amy, and I, we both had the privilege of singing and studying with Chris. Our favorite is, she talked about how we need to get on our sound. She put her arms up like this. You got to get on that sound and just ride it around. You know? She's on a motorcycle, just Chris, yeah, Chris, And I'll never forget, I've seen her do that so many times, but it's wonderful. It's been mentioned several times, the passion with which she lived her life in everything she did. But I'd like to add to that the compassion with which she taught and the love that she extended to us, the patience. She was a powerhouse in absolutely everything that we had the privilege to see her do. And if you've never experienced a winter in the high desert of eastern Idaho, you'd understand that knowing Chris, it was like this explosion of light and color that came into our lives in what sometimes can be a very dreary location in that time of the year. Kathy, when you read, was it Susan's words earlier? At one point she said that her light has gone out. And I have an alternate perspective. She has taken that light and passed the torch to all of us. And her light will never be extinguished because she has given that to us, and we continue to take that influence with us as we inspire those around us. I know we all have been touched deeply by Kristine Ciesinski, and that we all love her very deeply, and we miss her very much. But I know that the light that she brought into this world will never be extinguished because we carry it with us everywhere we go. And the passion with which we live our lives is a reflection of the passion and the compassion that she poured into us. Thank you.
When Chris came back from teaching in Florida, I was at her house for a voice lesson, watching her teach some of my friends and having my own, and we kept hearing this bzz, plunk, bzz, plunk. And so we stopped and we noticed it was when we looked closer, it was a dragonfly, and it was running into the window, trying to get out. And Chris stops and gets up from the piano with a piece of paper, and where most people would go, roll it up and whack, Chris takes the paper and puts it up to the dragonfly, and she's in perfect Chris style. Come here, Lovey. Come on, come on. Come on, Lovey, let's get you outside. Chris noticed things and cared about things that other people overlooked or didn't give a second glance to. And she saw the beauty and the value in them. And it was because of the person that she was. And some of my favorite moments were watching her sing, because she was radiant, like she glowed. And it wasn't because of her voice. Her voice was gorgeous. It was because of her heart. It was because of her heart. You could see into it when she was in her element performing and just doing what she loved. You could see into her heart and who she really was. And I know that I'm just like a speck in like a sea of people who she touched and who she loved. But I feel like my heart's more beautiful from having her in my life. And I'm so grateful for her. And I love her.
My name is Sam Chiba. I was a former student of Chris's for about 3.5 years. She was a magnificent person, to say the least. I met her through a friend of mine, Emily Hansen, who was a fabulous soprano, and I thought to myself, man, she knows what's going on. She knows how to sing. Like, I need to study with whoever she's studying with. So on my second semester at BYU Idaho, I started studying with Chris, and my life changed, just as many of yours have as well. It's because of her that my good friend Anna Kamas and I were able to make it into one of the top music schools, voice, and we've been able to flourish. Really, she gave us the tools that we need to be successful, not only as musicians and singers, but as people and colleagues. She's the kind of person the kind of motherly figure that every student or college student needs in their life. They're away from home. And in 2014, when I won the Idaho-Montana Met competition and I went on to the regionals, she was there the whole way. She was there for the competition. She was there for the regionals. She flew all the way to Seattle to come support. And because she was so loving and caring, and she was so invested in her students. And then one summer when I had the opportunity to go to Salzburg and perform a role in a young artist program, she did whatever she could to prepare me for that. She even organized her own opera scenes based on around the Marriage of Figaro, which is the opera that I was doing, but like specifically so I could get ready to be there. And I know she didn't really have any of her own children, but she was a mother to all of us that studied with her. I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful for her impact on my life and everyone else around me. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Cindy Wilson-Risco, a longtime friend of Chris's. And I'll start out with Irving Berlin's quote, "The song is ended, but the melody lingers on." Our friendship song began in 3rd grade. 2 silly girls carving a path of memories that zigzagged, hopped, skipped, jumped, running in craziness, as Chris is well known for. Learning the ropes of childhood, Chris literally taught me to swing from that vine, that tree vine in her woodsy backyard neighborhood, the Tarzan one, challenging me to grab my inner courage and overcome my very real fear of heights. Then there were the front flip lessons off the diving board that she and her dad had already mastered. So of course, they encouraged me to push my physical boundaries and just do it. I think Nike stole that slogan from Chris. Life to Chris was meant to be truly lived and definitely adventurous. We keep hearing that word. Our journey together growing up was an eyes wide open experience. In spite of Chris gifted with perfect pitch, she easily tolerated my sitting next to her in church choir. Knowing we were escaping to the Greasy Spoon to have gooey cinnamon rolls after practice. That kind of eased her out of the fact that we did not have perfect pitch like her. Then, totally out of my comfort range, she talked me into taking voice lessons from the same woman that worked with her. Needless to say, this was a fleeting experience for me. Chris was always trying to stretch the boundaries of the possibilities of what one can do, moving in any direction to raise the bar of living with ultimate passion. Yes, Chris, our friendship spanned 60 plus years of special memories. Singing with the Beatles, there they are. Laughing with Laugh-In, camping at Camp Takwa, Keeper of Secrets, my wedding soloist, and so much more. Here's to you, my friend, a sunflower of legacies in my heart.
Yet another voice here from Chris's past. I'm Ed Tupin. I first met Chris in junior high school. My younger sister started an elementary school band, and I was there babysitting her. The band director takes a look and sees this kid sitting in the audience of one, and says, "Wouldn't you like to do something?" Like, well, okay. Here's this horn. You blow in here, and you put your other hand here, and here's the keys, and you know how to read music. Start playing. I get the junior high school band, and there's Chris playing first chair French horn, and I'm here at the very, very other end of the row. But that's where Chris, first, many of you have talked about her teaching. Chris says, "Ed, hang in there. You'll get it. Here, let me show you how it's done." And she did. And so Chris and I, at one end and the other end of French horn line, all the way through junior high school and high school. And when I got to college, I suddenly found out just how much better she was than everybody else, because I wasn't nearly that bad when I was in college.
So, very briefly, I came to know Chris in a different path through my beloved professor, Kathy. I was at a time of transition. I wasn't sure what to do. Kathy introduced me to Chris, and I was going to follow her from Eastman to Florida State to work with her. And then, of course, she made the decision she couldn't leave for beloved mountains and Rocky and Norman and Chi-Chi, and so she called me up. And, you know, I was just a student singer who Kathy had said, you know, had some talent, and I wanted to work with her. And she called me up and said, come to the mountains and come work with me. If you want to make the decision. And without hesitation, I said, absolutely. I canceled my enrollment at FSU, and I went to Idaho. And so I only knew Chris for a short time, but this year was really transformative in a lot of ways. And the reason I wanted to say something was I know she has so many students, so many singers, so many people who she's helped give voice to that physical voice, that physical singing. But my year, going back and forth, turned into something so much more. And even in that short year, I mean, Kathy knows it was a time of transition for me as well. And what Chris did, I mean, she took me up in her glider. She pushed me in every way. She talked to me late nights about so many more things than just singing, about just being a person, about living your fullest life, about just being free and joyous. She let me take the Jeep or truck, whatever it was, and go out into the backcountry, like 10 miles to a trailhead, you know, not worrying about the fact that I was a city girl and had no idea what I was doing, except one day she and Norm said, you know, we heard you, because Driggs, Idaho is a small town. They said, we heard you were out. I don't even remember where it was. I said, this is pretty far back. You know, it's bear country. I said, yeah. And they said, here's a big can of bear spray next time. Which I took out and promptly sprayed myself in the face with. But it didn't stop me, and it didn't stop her. And so I spent days watching her teach her students. I spent days singing with her and hearing her stories. I spent days on my own in the mountains and with her dogs. And I have to say, one of the reasons I think she embraced me so fully was that her dogs liked me. And so she thought I was a good person. After I left that year, actually, I left singing. And it was a good... because of Chris and Kathy and that path, it was a really good, positive thing. It took a few years to realize, but I'm in a very happy, successful place in my life now. And I think about Chris and that year all the time and how it gave me that sort of comfort and strength to be myself, my true self, along with opening up my voice. And I was singing better than ever at the end of that year, I have to say. So I just wanted to share that.
There's so much more, and I just look forward to speaking and visiting and hugging and taking time with all of you. The stories are so rich. They are absolutely true, Chris. They are ever changing, even though they are similar. And I think one of the things that started it off was the fact that our family was just so special. Mom and Dad had no greater joy and no greater aim than to bring healthy and happy children into the world and share the love that they shared with each other. And I think they succeeded mightily. My sister and I were conceived a year apart, a year and 9 months apart, but my mom always wanted twins. And by the strangest of circumstances, she got them. So I never grew up thinking that I just had a sister. I really had someone who was much closer and much more aligned with everything that I understood and learned and felt and shared in the world. Chris and I found ways to involve each other in our lives continually. We learned a sign language when we were in church choir. And often because we were in different voice parts, one of us was on one side of the chancel and one of us was on the other. So during the sermon, we would talk to each other using our sign language. We had many ways of communicating that didn't even need language, of course, as you can imagine. Our looks, just one raised eyebrow, one just a little cock of the head or a little tensing of the shoulders, and we knew exactly what the other one was thinking, what the other one wanted to say. We both had so many formative experiences in common, and that was just because when one of us did something, we made sure that the other one understood and got there too. So one of my very pivotal moments was when Chris was at Boston University with Joelle, and in the summertime she took this, well, she actually convinced one of the teachers to run a summer course. Not surprising that my sister would be able to convince a teacher who should have been on break in the summer to turn around and keep teaching. And so she invited me and a bunch of our close associates up to have these movement classes. Joseph Gifford was the teacher. And so we learned how to be expressive with all different parts of our body. That was one of the wonderful exercises he gave us. So we were particularly fond of the angry toe, which was a good substitute for expressing anger in other very socially unacceptable ways. And we had so many experiences where we kept growing together, but we kept growing further. So there was never a limit to the seeking and the education that we shared all through our lives. It was just one of the great blessings that both of us ended up loving singing and being able to do it so well. And I think when we were back in the Prelude, one of the reasons that the Carmen entr'acte was included in that list of pieces was because we taught each other how to play that as a piano duet together. When learning that pretty much before we learned how to read words, we were at the piano learning how to read music together. I would think if she were standing here today, she'd just say that Kath taught me everything I know, but I'm going to say in my stead that she taught me almost everything I know. She taught me so much about discipline. She taught me so much about the sense of pushing boundaries. She really got me out of my head and into my body. She encouraged and inspired me as a musical artist, and I just know that there were so many ways that our artistry, again, was one of these two-headed monsters that just kept growing. We shared so many things, and today is no exception. We went shopping for these together. I have one, and now I've inherited hers. Her clothing and mine, for many years we were really the same size, even though we were very different physical beings. So we just traded clothes back and forth all the time. So these past 2 weeks when I was out in Idaho, actually cleaning her closet out to give many of her clothes away, I realized that there were so many things that I had the exact replica of, or I had the complementary color of. So it was like an echo chamber of experiencing all these shopping adventures that we had, and all of our planning of our concert gowns and garb. I want you to know that her gowns and many of her concert clothing is being housed in Idaho right now, and it will be for the use of her students from here on out. We haven't quite figured out how that's going to work yet, but it's being inventoried, and I will be adding many of mine to that collection as well, so that they will be available for people who want to have clothing for a special occasion and don't have the extra funds that we just seem to lavish on our wardrobes for our performances. I also wanted you to know that these beautiful tables to the side of the room contain really a truckload of pictures, but they also contain programs. And as many of you as have come here from Chris's studio, I tried to find programs that reflected your experiences in performing that she had a hand in. So take a good look at those. We have so many wonderful moments that we can continue to share as this part of our day winds down. But in closing this particular section of the place in our hearts that Chris occupies, she is my heart. And so this time for me is one of understanding what my heart actually is. It's understanding how my heart can be divided yet still functioning and still having integrity. It is me becoming a spokesperson and a continual conduit for the information that my sister knew and sister shared with everyone. So I have some tall orders on my plate, but they are joyous. They are natural to me. They are not hurtful. They are not painful memories. They are incredibly rich and are meant to enrich others. We wanted to close this section with something that we called our theme song. We claim that Johannes Brahms, who you've heard some beautiful, indelible memories of today in his Requiem, we found his duets to be perfectly expressive of so much that we had to say as musicians. And one of our all-time favorites, of course, was the one that we claimed that he wrote for us, which was the sisters who dressed alike and did everything together. Just as perfect closure to this part of our celebration of my sister.
Wir Schwestern seid schön, wie schön, so gleich und angesicht, so gleich ein Abend, ein Stern dem anderen nicht, ein Stern dem anderen nicht. Wir Schwestern seid wie schön, wir haben nussbraun Haar. Und willst du sie in einen Zoo, man kennt sie nicht für wahr, man kennt sie nicht für wahr. Wir Schwestern seid wie schön, wir tragen gleich gemacht, spazieren auf den Wiesen klar und singen Hand in Hand, und singen Hand in Hand. Wir Schwestern seid wie schön, wir spielen wie die Welt. Wir sitzen an einem Krug, wir schlafen in einem Bett, wir schlafen in einem Bett. O Schwestern, seid ihr schön, wie hat sich das Lächeln gemacht. Die Liebe deiner Liebe, ja, eine Liebe. Jetzt hat das Liedl ein End, jetzt hat das Liedl ein End.
give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive them that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory
We would like to lead you in all speaking this last poem together, from Little Gidding from the Fourth Quartets by T.S. Eliot. What we call a beginning is often the end, and to make an end is to make a beginning. The end is where we start from. We shall not cease from exploration, and
the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time.
That was